Uh, I just wanted to say a couple of things before your lesson, which is your lesson is the title is
When a cult leader is deprogrammed.
an occult leaders deprogram. So a couple of things. One very interesting at the moment. Obviously, again, events are going on around us. Apparently, Kit McKean has been disfellowshipped from his current uh, church, the ICC. This is what's being said on the internet. And he apparently the current leader is now calling up some ex-members who are marked to say that their marking doesn't count because Kip wasn't a disciple for the last 10 years. And I don't know if that also includes then people he appointed as evangelists and leaders. Anyway, that's all a bit kind of crazy. But then the deprogramming thing, I've been having a lot of debates with friends, ex-members and members on this WhatsApp group we have. And one of the things came up was about the Bible studies, because we're talking about programming, the Bible studies we used to do. And he was like, did we do a Bible study on love? Was there one
Mm-mm.
on love? And I was like, no, I don't think, we had discipleship, prayer, seeking God, word of God, baptism, repent,
Who's
nothing.
saved? Who's lost?
Who's saved, who's lost. And obviously the whole, like, I think the whole thing was obedience to the Bible is love. And I wrote something in 2003, which I looked up again today because I read it in 2003. I don't think I fully understood what I was saying because most of it really, I'm like 20 years later, I'm like, it's using a few scriptures about love. For me, it still holds up. Um,
Let me quote it for you.
okay,
This is how much we're in tune with each other.
okay, go on.
I'm letting the audience know. This is how much in tune we are. Connected 40 minutes ago online to record this first session and had private conversation until just now. And that is pretty, and talking about things that could be indelicate, possibly. Like, what did you know? When did you know it? Why did you not? Done it better type conversation. And I got to tell you, that to me is one of the reasons I love doing this with you. Is my trust with you is so 100%. We can have questions and discussions about things like that I find very rewarding and helpful. And I'm afraid so many others don't. But this morning, as I was reading Facebook, I saw your quote and loved it so much, I actually printed it out.
Oh,
I
James.
thought, I'm bringing this thing up today. So here it is. The fact that the ICOC/ICC has a series of Bible studies on how to become a disciple of Jesus, and not one of them is on love, tells you everything you need to know. I read that this morning and it really did hit me hard. I thought, that is so true. We didn't even mention it. It wasn't even a part of it. I thought it was a brilliant insight.
Well, it came about because again, it is conversations because it came about because I was talking with people on this WhatsApp group and somebody else brought it up, and then it made me think. So I know that conversations. That's why, again, I think it's so important people talking about this stuff because I think we as iron sharpens iron.
Mm.
So one person sharpens another. It's like as we talk about that, it helps us to it helps us to see. Anyway, that was my thing. So James, go ahead with your lesson.
Yeah, I really appreciated reading that this morning, and it did strike me that I had never even considered it. And yet, we want to be effective. We want to win the world. The whole thing about, well, this is how everybody will know you're the real disciples. We're going to give it to you now. Here it is. You ready? The fact that we could even see that verse as something to focus on how can we really distinguish ourselves from all others.
We totally ignored that. I mean, that verse, it literally says, to use the word literally, but by your love for each other. And it's like, oh no, it's going to be our baptisms and our righteousness and how committed we are and how zealous we are and how much we rebuke each other and how much.
That's it.
And I suppose to be fair, you can kind of understand that if you've got if you've got a particular mind, you can say, well, all of that is love. Obedience to God's commands is love. So it's and in fact, what Kip called sentimentality, I think was actually love, where, you know, hey, this brother who's fallen away, he needs me to hang out with him and just help him with his moving house. No, he's fallen away. Like he needs
What
to
are you
learn
doing?
what.
Are you sentimental? Do I detect some sentimental? Yeah, I've said before, it was only when I was in that church they taught me to respell sentimentality with S-I-N.
Oh,
That's the spelling of the word.
sentimentality, very good. And I think sentimentality is basically love. It's care. It's basically
Sure it
we were
is. It's what
literally
keeps people
stamping out
together.
love. Wherever we found love, we'd stamp it out.
Okay, well, let's get into this.
Okay.
I was deprogrammed. Now, here's the interesting part. I kept it a secret for 30 years. I don't think I told anyone for 30 years. And only last year did I begin sharing it. And I shared it with everyone last year. But I'm saying, I told you, I know I told our other friends, but I also told Doug Arthur. Oh, this is all in the past year. I explained to Doug. Uh, I told Steve Johnson. I told my wife. My wife did not even know about this, which is so interesting looking back on it. I mean, I have my thoughts about why that happened, but I told my kids. I was deprogrammed, and it happened, best I can guess, about 8 months before I left the ministry and then the church. That's the time frame I can best gather. Here's what happened. I was living in London doing the work there, and I got a call from Huntsville, Alabama, and saying, we need you to come speak for a weekend at our church. It's coming up in a month. And we'd like for you to speak the whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So also, while you're here, we are going to go over our budget for next year in terms of how much money we can give to the London church. Okay, little pause here for Huntsville, Alabama. They deserve credit and praise. That congregation in Alabama was so generous with helping us spread the word to the London church. They ended up taking over people's salaries, so they were given. And this was that one congregation. They had a wealthy elder from another congregation that also joined in to give. But they were doing more. They were supporting more than two people full time in our group. John Louis, Daniel Wing. I remember it, mostly Asia. So I just want to make this comment. Churches were not that helpful with supporting us when we first started. And Doug and I traveled everywhere to try to raise money for London. And it was tough. When you're out in the mission field and there's no money coming in, Richard Rogers used to equate that with the David sending out the guy to do the battle out on the front lines and then withdrawing all the men away from him. So he's going to die. Like, what do we do? How do we send people out like that and then not support? Doug found a church that said we could preach and they would give us a check, and it was in Detroit. And it was the church that he was raised in when he was a little boy, or his mom won. But we drove from Boston. We were still in Boston. We drove to that traditional church in Michigan. It took us so long to get there. We drove straight through. We didn't stay. We didn't have money. We didn't stay in a hotel or anything. And we got there, and then we spoke on Sunday night, and they gave us a check. So Doug was gracious and just put it in his, drove back to Boston. Before, as soon as we got out of the parking lot, I said, you got to check that check right now. I need to know how much money they give us. And he looked and he went, oh my gosh, what? They gave us $15. This check is for $15. I said, well, that's just an insult. That's an insult. What could be worse? He went, they misspelled my name. How do you not spell Doug? They spelled it D-U-G. They spelled my name D-U-G. And this is a traditional church. And we just laughed and drove all the way back to Boston. Something that's not so funny is I was just about a full-time fundraiser the whole time I was in the movement, and raising money for London was just one of the many. But Tanya and I sat down and looked through my calendar near the end of me being in London and figured out that the year before I'd spent 150 nights away from my family. 150. I mean, I was, churches were using me to raise money for special contributions. I'll talk about more of that later, by the way. I'm getting to that as a confession. But my point is, Huntsville was different. Huntsville gave the money. Doug said, absolutely, you got to go. This is important, James. So you do your preaching on the weekend and just do your best. If you can get the same amount we had last year from them, that's a big success. But we need it. Okay. Showed up on Friday afternoon. Someone gave me a ride to the home of Clyde Jones. If you've known me very long, you know this is one of my favorite men who's ever lived. This is truly, I'm sorry, Kip. You may thought I was your son in the faith, but let me just tell you something right now, dude. You were not ever my father in the faith. I just want you to know that. Never close. Clyde Jones was more of a father in the faith to me than you were. And so we got to his home. I was happy to see him and big hugs. And I got food on the way coming here, James. And I went, great. He said, we got something special planned for you for the weekend. I said, what? He said, let me introduce another friend that's here to see you. And all of a sudden, in comes Jerry Jones into the we were sitting at the kitchen table. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. I didn't know you were going to be here, Jerry. What am I doing speaking all weekend? You know, we got to divvy this up somehow. This is great. And then they said, we have another one of your friends. And in walks Richard Rogers. Whoa. There was an old song that was years ago here by Don McLean called American Pie. And
so I've got to say it's one of my favorite songs ever. So just go, yeah.
Oh, I love that. And there's that weird line when he says, and the three men I admired most, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. They caught the last train to their coast the day. These were the three men I admired most that I was in that room with. I was beyond myself, filled with glee. And that's when they said, things have changed. You're not going to be speaking tonight. We have a special thing we're going to do all weekend. You won't be speaking today or tomorrow. There is no church. We do want you to preach on Sunday. Well, what's going on? The three of them are there, and they pull out their Bibles, and they say, we want your help with a very important project. I said, what is it? I'll do whatever I can. We want to make sure that when deprogrammings are happening, that we're being legitimate in our charges. We want to make sure that they are true. We want to make sure that they're not being exaggerated. And we couldn't think of anyone we trust more than you to give us that feedback. So I was like, it didn't even cross my mind that this was an intervention for me. I thought they're trusting me to go over all of their material. And I thought I was honored about that. Plus, I thought, Doug is going to be thrilled about this. Seriously, I finally get to know everything that goes on in one of these deprogrammings. This is great information to have. So I said, okay. And then they laid it out. What I didn't realize is the deprogramming was for me. But I would have never handled it had they said, you're being deprogrammed. That door's locked, and, I don't know. That just wouldn't have worked. But the way they did it did work. And I said, sure, I'll give you feedback. And they said, every 2 hours, we're going to stop and ask you everything we've said in the last 2 hours. Is it legit? Is it real? Is it overly exaggerated? Because we don't want that. I said, I'll be honest with you then. Let's go. They said, before we get in the material, we need to say this. Here's the rules. When you need a break, just ask for it. Okay. If you need an extended break, in other words, if you say, I don't want to do this anymore for the rest of the day, just ask. If you want to stop entirely, Just ask. And we will promise that we will not even say, oh, come on, give it just one more hour. Let's just go one more hour. We've gone to all the trouble to be here all over the world, and we won't do that. As soon as you say this is over, it's over. You ever want to take a 10-minute break just for a walk outside or a prayer or a refreshment? You ever are ready to eat and it's distracting? Tell us. We got food coming in all weekend. It struck me before we even got started. They're being more gracious to me than I've ever been with someone I've studied the Bible with. They're being more gracious to me than any Christian I've ever counseled or had to confront or rebuke. Never had I ushered words like this. And so it started. On Saturday afternoon, a horrifying revelation emerged for me. Now, I remember this so clearly. This is what I said to myself. They're trying to paint the worst picture possible of our church and our movement. And yet, I know that we are far worse than they propose. And I shared that with them 3 times. There were 3 times over those 2-hour segments when they would say, do you think we were unfair? Do you think we exaggerated? And I'm sitting there going, okay, this is horrible. No, you're not accurate. Really? It's far worse than you say. You're trying to paint a bad picture of what's going on in our movement. I know enough to know what you're saying is not even close. So you have an example of what happened to a sister that didn't take the advice to go to church on a weekend and instead went to her parents' house and she was told this and this, and you're telling me that's your worst example of someone that didn't take advice? Dude, you missed it by a landslide there on what we've done to people that did not take advice. There were 3 times, and I gave the real stories. When I left Huntsville on Sunday afternoon, in my heart, I knew I would be leaving the movement. I still remember that so clearly. The question was how and when, and how I could support my family going forward. By the way, I've heard Jerry Jones interviewed. Aldo even asked him, have you ever participated in interventions, deprogramming? And he said, no, I haven't. I haven't done one. And I've got to tell you, thinking back on all of it, I think you could say, technically speaking, he may be right. Because even in his mind, maybe he wasn't thinking, I'm there that weekend to do a deprogramming of James Lloyd, but rather to find out from him if the material that we are going to be using, the other people, is legit or not. And by the way, at the end, there was no conversation about, so what do you think, James? Are you ready to leave? Are you ready to leave? They didn't do any of that. It was, thank you so much for all the feedback you gave us. And I left. But I knew I would be leaving the movement. And the reason was simple. As much as I'd heard about these horrible deprogrammings, I experienced it. And we, as a group then, were much worse off than what they were sharing in the deprogramming. I couldn't let that bounce off of me somehow. I could not allow that just to go by. It was the moment I knew I'm going to be leaving this church, and did not tell a soul. Give me your thoughts or questions.
So I got a few questions and
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah,
So and
yeah.
then how much time we got?
Not a lot.
So we can maybe do it into the next session. But how much time we got? Like 2 minutes or 5 minutes or?
Yeah, we got five.
So thank you first of all, James, for
Yeah.
sharing that. It's very powerful and very and fascinating. I love the Don McLean reference. I love that song. Don
The
McLean.
three men I admired
It's
most.
it's possibly also my favorite line in the song. I think it might be my
How
favorite line
cool
in the
is that?
song. Mm. The three men, they all took the last train for the coast. Um, so, and it's beautiful. I think those three guys really cared about you and loved you. I'm fascinated.
I think you're right.
I think there's every possibility they weren't necessarily even trying to deprogram you. I don't know. Maybe they genuinely were trying to develop this
Jeez,
program.
I've never even considered that, Matthew.
They weren't being as subtle as as clever as you think they were being. They just genuinely thought, oh, let's we trust James and we don't want to be doing stuff that's unfair. And
I've
let's so
I've never considered that.
because those guys are not psychologists, they're all preachers.
And
They're not like
two are dead. Jerry Jones
yeah,
is the only one still living.
and so it's not like they were like clever. It's like they maybe it was just purely genuine, and they accidentally deprogrammed you. So I think it's a very interesting story, and I don't know if you're in touch with Jerry Jones at all, or
Not much. I
so
mean, we do talk maybe once a year or something.
so maybe it'd be if you ever ask him, it'd be interesting. But so first of all, I want to go back to Hunt. There's quite a few questions generally. I want to understand this. At this point, Huntsville was not part of the movement, the ICOC movement, was it? Part of the KIPS, part of Boston.
It, no, they were a hybrid. They were a
Uh,
unique hybrid, traditional church that Tom Bogle was there
uh,
and actually did a great job of building a crossroads type church. He brought in his own singing group, by the way, that were, in my opinion, as good as the Crossroads Singers. I mean, we had his group come over to London during one of our Hope sessions. So he had done
and,
a great job of establishing in a conservative area and with a fairly conservative all traditional churches of Christ all around them job of building a dynamic church,
and then,
frankly, there.
do you think Tom Bogle knew about this intervention? He must have done, or not?
Don't even know.
It's interesting.
I don't even recall ever talking to him over the weekend.
So, and also, Jerry Jones at some point got disfellowshipped and marked
Yeah.
by KIP. But I'm assuming this was before that happened.
Yes, Jerry was
Okay.
out of the group totally.
But had he been marked when this went on?
Don't recall.
Okay, but he'd left Kip.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you still felt very comfortable seeing him. There was no sense of oh gosh, this is an enemy of the church now.
Dude, it's like when C-Mac got marked by the New York church.
Yeah,
And Steve Johnson, who's super close friends, goes to New York to preach for the church and stays at his house for the weekend.
yeah. No, I got you. I got you. Okay,
You know,
so that all makes sense. And then they do the thing. Okay, this is a question I wanted to ask. Like so, and maybe you can't remember when they're saying that stuff to you. This is what happened with the sister. Can you remember any of the things that went through your mind that were worse? What the actual specific stories in your mind? Well, we did this, or is it too far back?
too far back.
No problem. I mean, to be fair,
But I do know that the examples I gave were three times crazier than the ones they were using.
I mean, to be fair, that stuff is all kind of recorded in podcasts and books, and so it's not like if
Yeah.
people want to find out the crazy stuff that people have gone through, it's not like it's not there. Including Nadine's recently, even just. I think those were the main things. I'm trying to think. Uh, I think it's a yeah, I don't know what else to say really about it. I love the bit that you were honest with them about the way that they gave you so much freedom that we hadn't necessarily, the way we treated people was so much more. I mean, I remember a brother who left the church. He kind of got baptized and then stopped coming. Me and my discipler stalked him. We sat because he didn't want to talk to us. We sat outside his house in Birmingham in a car, waiting for him to come home so we could challenge him and try and, um, so so yeah, that contrast is very powerful.
Well,
Yeah.
let me say this before we leave. You brought up something I have never considered, and boy, does it have my brain buzzing right now, which is it he may have not been as devilish as I thought with a manipulated technique. It may have been, we love him, he loves us, we all trust each other, let's just do this. But my heart was soft enough, knowing things that weren't right, that the
I think that's what James,
deprogramming,
I honestly, because I think that might be what happens from what you're
that's
saying.
crazy.
It is crazy. I mean,
But
that would,
it's weird that I never even considered it.
because there was no follow up. There was no, uh, and maybe they decided afterwards we're not going to do this deeper because oh, the other thing I have to say is I do know people who've told me that they went through a deprogramming and it
Yeah.
was much more aggressive, I think, than the one that you went through. And so I know there has been different I can't speak. I don't want to say that all deprogramming was what you experienced because I know that other people have got testimonies and experiences where it was much more aggressive and much more where they felt they were being held against their will and much more being kind of forced. So I think that there's probably a range of situations out there. So to be fair.
Well, I'll say this one last thing before we end this
Yeah.
session. And I'm going to talk later today and later about Nadine. One thing I've asked for from everyone, including you, is to give her more time and give her more space and give her more grace. Because what she's done has been brave, and I'm telling you this, Nadine, totally respect everything you've done and the way you've done it. And with what you're sharing, it's easy for others that have been frustrated for years to say, keep going, tell the full truth. Why are you stopping there? And why are you still even going to that church? I mean, what's going on with that? It's easy to do that. But for someone that went through it, a different pathway, but went through it myself, grace is the need of the. I I think she is doing it as quickly as she can, as thoroughly as she can, and this is about as much proof of cultic brainwashing as anything. The fact that even after you get out, it's still in there. And that's the part that I want people to understand. And and here's the proof. Since we're talking about deprogramming, I got out of the church. It was announced. Everybody knew I was out of the church. We left. Tanya and I left the movement. We were living in Phoenix, Arizona. I got a call from 2020, the news show, saying, would you come on the show and tell us what you know about the movement? I said, I'm not up for it. I just left 8 months ago, or it's not a good time for me. I don't care to do it. And he said, well, we are right now. We got something that's major. We have sent one of our plants, one of our reporters got, quote, met on the street in the New York church and is now in the Bible studies and has done every Bible study and is getting baptized on Sunday. And Steve Johnson's father is the one studying with him. And so we're not going to bring it up. We're going to let him. We want to find out what happens when someone's inside and is already a member. We're going to record everything. So I went, okay. I hung up that call and I called Steve Johnson and said, you need to be careful, man. There's a plant from one of the journalists from 2020 studying the Bible with your dad, and he's getting baptized on Sunday, and he's wearing a mic and he's wearing wire, and they're planning on doing it as long as they can go to find out what's going on. Steve Johnson goes, thank you, brother. I'll take care of this right now. They found the guy, told him to get lost. He never got baptized. I made that call to Steve after I left the movement. Let that sink in. Think about how eager you are now for people to get the truth out about this group. And that was one way they could do it, is by having a plant that was inside their numbers. But I blew that plant up. even though I was out of the church. Weeks later, I get a call from Karen Louie's mother. She said, James, I know you're out of the church. We've heard about it. Karen told me you're out. So I thought I would share this with you. We have professionals right now, 3 of them, on the way to Malaysia to deprogram Karen. Really? Yeah, they are on the flight right now. James, I don't even want to tell you how much money this cost us, but it's in the thousands and thousands. But it's worth it for us to get her out. So we know where she is. She's right now on a vacation with John. She told me the town. And they'll be there tomorrow. And I hung up and called John Louie and said, they're coming to deprogram your wife. They're coming. They know where you are. They know you're on a vacation. He said, oh my gosh, you're right. We are here. And not many people know we're here. I said, yeah, well, they're coming and they're going to deprogram her. And he said, oh my gosh, James, thank you. Well, we're taking off. We're not even going to be here tomorrow. We're going to go somewhere else. I did that after I left the church. I was out. And yet I wanted to warn them. It doesn't hardly make sense, except for the fact it's easier to leave the movement than to have the movement leave you. There are parts that are so deep. There are parts that are in the deepest crevices of your soul. And I was out of the church. I should have been praising. I should have been celebrating about what was about to happen in both cases. But I had been out of the church even a longer time than Nadine has right now. So I just want to make that plea. I want to make that plea to give grace. Thank her for what she's saying. Understand more will be coming later when she's ready. And that's it for my thoughts on the deprogramming. Thank you. And by the way, your question has my mind spinning. Your question has by the way, I'm not even going to tell you the leader. I talked to a current leader in the church a few months back and told him the story. And his reaction was crazy. I don't want to tell you who it was, but he went, so they didn't tell you. They just said they wanted you to see if you agree. That's tremendous. That is so incredibly smart. Like they knew. I got to give them credit for that. That is creative. That is innovative. And that was the part that struck him so much was the manipulation part. He thought was so creative. And now you've got me thinking, I may have misrepresented a lot of that. And I'm going to check out. I'm going to ask Jerry. He's the only one still alive. I'm going to ask Jerry about, and there's no wrong answer. There's not even a wrong answer for me. I hope it was. My heart was so pure that even when I wasn't being deprogrammed, I could do no other. Oh boy. Thanks for that.